Okay. Good afternoon. Shluchim. I just heard by lunch they announced that Magili Godel, that the way to bring Mashiach is through Chassidus. As was said, the Baal Shem Tov heard this already from Mashiach a long time ago, over 9 generations ago, and none of the Rabbeim ever changed the agenda. Those 3 words capture the essence of all the Rabbeim, and as the Rebbe put it, as we also heard the Deir Hashvi, the Siyama Aveda. So if any time Chassidus is needed, more than ever is now. So I'm glad and honored to be able to say a few words about that. And hopefully my objective here is to create a shtickl chayis, and they say to us, both for ourselves and for our Mushpayim, that Chassidus is our best possible, I don't want to use the word weapon, tool. Nothing beats it. First of all, we're the only ones that have it, so there's no competition. And number 2, it is simply the gift that was given to us by the Rabbeim. And number 3, it actually, when those that use it, can transform people's lives. Just as a short introduction, you remember Newsweek magazine? Excuse me. Newsweek magazine, which I think started being published again recently. So I had known the editor-in-chief, John Meacham was his name, not a Jewish guy, but a very spiritual guy. And as editor-in-chief of a large magazine like that, you can imagine he has great influence. And so several times a year, these magazines have they do cover stories about spirituality or religious issues in America and so on. So I remember one issue was called Spirituality in America, and of course they represent the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews and the Buddhists. So who represented the Jews? They had their Zalman Schachter. So I wrote him an email because I knew him when he was still a religion editor. So we had a certain friendship, and I wrote him. I said, of all people, he actually studied Chassidus. First with Abraham Joshua Heschel, who came from Chassidus Kapishnitz and so on. And he had learned Chassidus Chabad too. So I said, you of all people know that spirituality today, at least Jewish spirituality, is Chassidus Chabad. So why didn't you cover that at all? So he wrote back to me 3-4 lines, but it was very sharp lines, which I just think is important to all of us here, because it was a real wake-up call. And those lines were the follows. He writes back to me, you and I may know that, but no one else in America does, nor in the world. And it's not my job to make the people know. I'm an editor-in-chief of a mainstream magazine. Chabad is known as a social movement, where anywhere in the world you can go and find a warm Chabad house, a Shabbat meal, a family and loving attitude, unconditional love. But that's a social movement. Chabad is not known as a philosophical movement that has anything to say about ideas. And you have your work cut out for you. That was his words. And he didn't even mean to be sharp. He was just speaking what his job is. His job is a journalist. He reports. He doesn't... we're the people in sales. He's just a reporter. But for me it was a very poignant moment because it captures something that we all have to really take to heart. Frankly, I don't see how there's anything else that we should be doing but that. It's the Ikar HaShlichus, not just the Ikar HaShlichus. You talk about Mashiach. Yefutza Ma'anesecha Chutza. We know what Ma'anesecha is, Chassidus. So just wanted to start with that short opening. The question is, how do we make it something that's indispensable for us and for others? That's the biggest challenge. Because we all know, if something you must do, you do it. You all must fundraise, you get it done. A little harder, a little this, but you got to do it. There's no choice. You have to have a shul, you have to have a Shabbos meal. These are necessities. Chassidus has to be as necessary as oxygen, because that's the tool we were given. Besides that, it's Torah. The Torah Chassidus. This is the reason we went Ashlichus in the first place. So, when they asked me to do this, I right away said, you know what, let's take the hardest Hemshech Chassidus altogether, Ayin Beis, which is the Mount Everest. It's one thing learning a single Maimed, and just take the thing itself, Ayin Beis, and then let's see if we can make it indispensable and decipher it in a way that you can't live without it. Because if you can live without it, Rahman al-Islam, we all know we have a lot of priorities in life. Chassidus has to be, you can't live without it. And more importantly, if your people can't live without it, then you'll be forced to have to feed them. I think that's the revolution we have to create. And we have, how many pages do we have? Thousands of pages. I didn't even add them up. How many stories are there in a Kohoz bookshelf from the Alter Rebbe through the Rebbe? Maybe 200. I know we know the different colors and so on. It's a nice library. I thought to myself as a writer, how long would it take a Rebbe to write, let's say, Hemshech Ayin Beis? It's something like 1,500 pages, all 3 volumes. Now, even if you didn't ever give thought to it, to write 1,500 pages can take a long time, especially with all the thought. So what did the Rabbeim choose to do? If you know the Rebbe included, most of the day they were learning. Before the Rebbe spoke more than he wrote, but the other Rabbeim, what they do, they were writing all day. There's no way that Eira Teira and the Rebbe Marash and the Rebbe Rashab and Frierdiker Rebbe, all those Sfarim, they didn't come out of nowhere. So they decided that it was the single most important thing for them to do is not to take Yechidus, not to answer questions. They did also that. But what was their, most of the time, was to write what some would call esoteric discourses. Chassidus. That many people say, I don't know what it means, can't relate to it. And the Rabbeim, that's what they were Meiser Nefesh to do. Frierdiker Rebbe was Meiser Nefesh to hold on to the Ksovim. We know that Rebbe's Meiser Nefesh for the manuscripts of Chulu v'Chulu. So clearly, it was not an option. And it cannot be an option for us. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here. It's always important to state the goals. See, Rav Nochem Goldschmidt, the great Mashpia, was a big maskil in Chassidus. Actually, in the later years in Tel Aviv, was friends with the Rebbe's brother. They would speak Chassidus for hours in Tel Aviv. So he was also in yeshiva. He was a Mashgiach in Nigla. So they asked him, "What is Mashgiach in Nigla? Chassidus is your thing." So he says, "Chassidus is from Nefesh Abamis. The Hafraskafi and for Aveda, Mashgiach in Nigla." So Halavai, our Nefesh Abamis should enjoy Chassidus, because then you're sure you're going to do it. You know, for Nefesh Alikis, we know Chassidus is food and sustenance. That's a dover poshet. It's a lakus, and it's Teres HaChassidus and Teres HaMashiach, and so on. The question is where also our Nefesh Habamis can benefit. And the famous Kuntis in Yonash Teres HaChassidus, the Rebbe makes it very clear, the end there in the Ha'ara, in the Perek Yud Ches, and the Rebbe writes that Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Le Teira Tavlin. How could you call Teira Tavlin? Tavlin is like a spice, like a medication for Yetzer Hara. That's what Teira is, a medication. And the Rebbe says, no. Teira is Shashui Lefonov, especially Primis HaTeira. It's Primis HaKeser. He brings from Ayin Beis there, actually. The Rebbe printed then a Maimer from Podav Shalom, Ayin Hey. That's Primis HaKeser. Atzmus Ein Sof Chassidus. But where do you see? Wo drickt sich Eis? Where do you see the power of Atzmus and Chassidus is when it goes down to the Nefesh Habamis and can help a person in their personal lives, in their midas hakas, good things, positive things, shalom bayis, and so on. So Chassidus and Torah were not given for that. Obviously, they're elikus. But when you see that happening, then you see the etzem of Torah being this gala. So the bottom line is, unless Chassidus helps a person in their life, that's Adarabah, that's the biggest expression of Chassidus' truth. To say, just make it into a holy book and say it's only when you're in a mood of Kedusha. No, it's practical guidance for every aspect of life. The Alter Rebbe writes it beferish in Agdama Tanya. Says the Kute Eitzes, Chol Inyanim Bavedas Hashem. Ad Kedei Kach he writes it. He says that if you and you can't find an answer, go to the Gedalim Shabir. So clearly he meant that everything is in there. We go to therapy or other things. That could be maybe Mitzach Sar and Das, or because we can't find Gedalim, but it's definitely not Lechat Chila. So that's my short Hagdama. So now let's get to the topic itself. You know, so Hemshech Ayin Beis. Let's make it a little dramatic. You all know the Sikha probably of Tafshin Lamed Zayin. So Hemshech Ayin Beis is the longest Hemshech in Chassidus. The Rebbe Rashab began writing it, they say, in the winter of 1912, which would be the winter of Taf Reish Ayin Beis. And it went on, and then he began delivering it Shvuas Ayin Beis. And then he went on writing what we know all the way almost till Tafresh Ayin Tes, because he refers to my mother from Tafresh Ayin Tes in the last volume. So this means from basically the last 7-8 years of the Rebbe Rashab's Chaim Chayusi Bal Medain, this is what he dedicated his life to. And it's not a small matter, because you also may know that when Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch, Shabbos Pasha Vayera Tofrei Ayin Vov, we're now entering 100 years from then. That was the last time he said a maimer from Ayin Beis. He continued writing, but he did not deliver any more maimorim. So for some reason it was connected to Lubavitch. And most of the maimorim were delivered in Lubavitch itself. Remendel Marozov, maybe a Riches Yom V'Shanim Tevis, he was a little child, but the glow of Ayin Beis, he said, still affected anyone that was there. So until Tafshin Lamed Zayin, we only had the first maybe 20 Maimorim. Kupir. It was printed like other Maimorim, and that was that. Everyone knew there was a whole continuation, but no one had it. Not even the Chassidish Gnevis, no one had it. Not on WhatsApp, and not in any other type of ways, obviously. And that was it. Many times that Rashag, Ellis Simpson, and other Chassidim would try to encourage the Rebbe to print it. And the Rebbe would say, it seemed like it was a financial issue. When we discovered it was not. So Samach Vav was published in the early Lameds, I think, Chavtes, Lamed. The Rebbe was Magia Sichitz. In the back of Samach Vav talks about how Samach Vav is a taste of Mashiach, Sudas Mashiach, and so on. Dalet cases. That was the year that Rebbe Rashab instituted Dalet cases at Sudas Mashiach for the yeshiva. Ayin Beis, so suddenly out of nowhere, without any preparation, Yutas Kislev Tov Shalamed Zayin. So we have now Mem Zayin, Nun Zayin, Samach Zayin. How many years is that? 37 years ago. 37 years ago, the Rebbe, middle of the Fabrengen, started talking about Ayin Beis. And it's printed, you could find it. And he said things that were pretty strong atheists. He said, I've been plagued and bothered years now about something. That when the Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling and running out of Russia, he says that Frierdiker Spirit gave me to protect and to hold the famous Hemshech Ayin Beis. Because the journeys, he was not sure what's going to happen. So the Rebbe said, what did he do? He says, they saw Ayin Beis. He says, I didn't know what's going to happen next, so what did I do right away? Immediately, I made a copy of it all. And you can imagine making a copy of it in those years was not a simple matter. And the Rebbe made a copy. He says, the Rebbe made a copy of it. Later, he included it in his Mafteches when he made the Mafteches from the Rebbe Rashab. And he says, and since then,
what kind of copies were there in those days?
I don't know, that should be another workshop probably, And the Rebbe then said that it's been sitting by me ever since. And then the Rebbe brought the din that when you give someone a sefer, you're not supposed to watch a shemer. You're not supposed to look into it, because you were not given to look into it. You were given to protect it, except with one exception. If you give a sefer to a Talmud Chacham, so you know a Talmud Chacham is going to look in the sefer, so that whoever the Balabas knows. So the Rebbe said, Bavon, he says, don't get nishtarayin to Talmud Chacham sinisht. But the fact is that the Shver knew that anything given to me is not going to stay secret, and I'm going to be mefarsim it. But till this day, I still have it and have not done anything with it, because I wasn't given the Hira. And the Rebbe then said, mysterious aces that Adiyem is that no one really knows what it means. The Rebbe said it was connected to Asakona. Basically, there was something dangerous about publishing it. I checked with many people, no one had any clue. Till then, it was thought, Ayin Beis, simply the money wasn't there. But the Rebbe clearly connected it to something serious. And then he said, because it's still sitting by me and it's Chassidus and it's the biggest Hemshech of all Hemshechim, the Rebbe uses the words, and I'm emphasizing this, Bekavona, Nefloyis, Afil Legabed, and Nefloyis from Samach Vov, the Rebbe's Asius. So now I feel that I must do something, but because it's connected to Sveikis and Sakona V'chulu, I don't want to do it alone. So Varfich is Svishin Chassidim, meaning all of you will participate, everyone should give $1. I'm summing up the Sikha. Not mitzad hitzos, we're not looking here for raising money, it's just a shtatfus. And it will not be published with any names. So it doesn't say the Rebbe's name in there, it doesn't say Api Hidos, nothing. Lamed Zayin, Yutas Kislev. And the Rebbe said, therefore it's going to be a thing of all Chassidim, and won't have any Hagdoshes or nothing like that. And that's what happened. By Yud Shvat, it was printed, which was the next. Took a month. Mafteches were made. Now, Chassidim said then the next year was the Rebbe's heart attack, Simchas Torah. So people did not see it as disconnected. The Rebbe said clearly, Sakon. And the second Heitzah of Ayin Beis was Nun Beis, was Nun Aleph. And we all know what happened Nun Beis. This is complete Hashara. I don't even want to say there's any connection, but I want to mention it. Do with it as you wish. But the Rebbe definitely said it. And I've always struggled. Why would the Rebbe say that? I mean, what's the problem with me Megala Teda? But of course, that's Yitas Kisel, there's Elba Kasha. Why would the Alter Rebbe have to be imprisoned because of a Kitrig Lamaila? Melech, Rachmanu Litzlan, someone does something inappropriate. Okay. To be Megala Teda, since when is that a problem? And yet, there's a ganze Yitas Kislev, and you say Yitas Kislev, that means that Lamaila was given a shus, Adarabah to be Mefarsim Chassidus even more. So clearly, Chassidus in this world is not a simple matter. Here's not the place that observes its own Fabreng, and why? Because Chassidus has the power to change the world. That's why. Simple as that. And the Satcha Keneged will do everything possible to stop it. Nigla does not have that power. Never says anywhere about Gilei HaNigla, and even Big Chidushim, that has that element. Because Chassidus has the power to bring Mashiach. Simple as that. So you can imagine that it's going to be tied, connected with challenges. And of all of them, Ayin Beis remained the so-called final frontier that the Rebbe finally in Lamed Zayin, whatever reason, we don't know why Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe released it. And here we are. Everything you need an excuse. So when it started Tafshin Ayin Beis, it was 100 years from Ayin Beis, I decided, you know what, good opportunity, let me start learning it. I started teaching it. Adayim Azeh, I give a class every morning from 8 to 9, and put it up all on YouTube, so the Satcha Keneged could deal with it, and teach it. And I want to share what I believe, Yesh Leim B'derech Hefsher, why the Rebbe said Neflois, Legab Neflois, and what tak is an Ayin Beis, the Chassidus B'chlal, but an Ayin Beis specifically, that has this power to change the world. It has this power that the Rebbe himself was sensitive to the fact that he doesn't want to take the achrayus to publish it, which is a serious thing. So, I don't know if any of you have learned it or not. It's a big, long hamshech. I'm already learning it and teaching it 4 years now, since Ayin Beis, now 3 years, and we're Ayin Hey, and I'm barely holding Pei the Greish Pei Beis. That's what I finished today, which is 2/3 of the first krach. So I guarantee you that Mashiach will be here before I finish, which is good news, but I hope long before that. And I must say, learning it is mamish transformative. And as I said, it's the name of Nachum Goldschmidt. The goal here is to touch the Nefesh Habamis, not just the Nefesh Halikis. So let's go over. They asked me what Parakim. I'll tell you the truth, I didn't know which. I just chose a selected group of Parakim. So I want to go over two things. To learn inside, the push is going to be, I don't think it's the best use of time. Instead, I'll point out certain pieces, maybe read a few lines. Because to learn it all, just push it not b'kdei sheyas. I'm not just talking about the hemshech. I'm talking about even this kuntis. And so I'll point out key elements, and most importantly, I want to lay out the mivna, the binyan, the structure of Ayin Beis, and above all, to make it in language that is relevant and personal. Because the truth is, that's the challenge we have b'chlal, not just with Ayin Beis. Can somebody here explain this to a secular Jew that walks into your Chabad house? You wouldn't even venture, probably. You know, there are ideas in Chassidus. It's a little easier to talk about, Birur Hamidus or something like that. Certain thoughts in Tanya, everyone, the famous one, Atzvus and Merirus, everybody knows that one. The difference between depression and sadness. But Chassidus is a lot more than that. Chassidus is a whole sugi, a whole Seder Ishtalshlus. So, the challenge here is not just Ayin Beis, but Ayin Beis epitomizes it, because Ayin Beis is literally endless. I would even say the word relentless. Because just when you think you're getting it, the Rebbe Rashab starts with Nacha Pedek. And you have to always wonder, what's the tzrichas? Like, what was missing that he needed to write 3 volumes? Until Ayin Beis, you could say, 1 second, you gave a single Maimon, what's mitamot? What did Ayin Beis contribute that the Rebbe saw as such a chiddush that was not there before, to the Ad Kedei Kach Sakona, and the Neflois Legab Neflois? That's what I want to address, but within the teichen of the Hemshech itself. And why? Most likely, this is the Hemshech that we will march to Mashiach with. Because it captures Chassidus like no other Hemshech does. The Rebbe Rashab makes it very clear, if you look at the Arum of Ayin Beis, that this was his magnum opus, more than Samach Vov, more than anything. This is where he put his most keiches into it. And there's a fascinating history. Just the Rebbe Rashab went over Ayin Beis 5 times, which he didn't do it anywhere. Till he added, first he wrote the whole flow. Then he added the beginnings and ends. Then he went over again after the Maitik connected it all. He added more Hagos, third bounce. Then the 4th time he added Prakim and Kitsurim, and everywhere the whole Hemshech he changed from the Maimed to the Pedic name. And you could clearly see when you talk Rambam of Chassidus, this is where it comes out. When I'm learning it, I also look up the sources where the Maimorim come from, and every sugi in Chassidus is an Ayin Beis. And I don't know if you know this, but Ayin Beis isn't even finished. The Rebbe Rashab did not finish it. How do we know? Because the last chelik, Shalei Nemar, has questions that are not answered. So first let's learn till there, then we'll worry about the last half, the last end. And see if we can figure it out. So the question really, that may be the best way to ask the question is, what did Ayin Beis come to contribute? What's missing? This is really the 5th generation of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe was Miyaset Chassidus Chabad. We have Samach Vov is known as Samach Vov. What did Ayin Beis come to add that's not there before? So this is all B'yesh Leim B'derech Hevshin. I'm sure everybody learns. You'll find different answers to this. But it seems to me, from learning it, and I think this can illuminate the whole structure, is that Rebbe Rashab was laying out, the first time ever, the whole picture of Chassidus in one place. Even though the Alter Rebbe obviously laid out the groundwork, but we all know the Alter Rebbe is Chochmeh, Mittler Rebbe is Bina, but you don't have the Rambam style. A real structure where you can look at something and get every detail on a particular sugya. You have to learn a lot of Maimorim to know all the details, let's say, about Eshes Sfiris or about Atzilus. And in Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab brought it all together. And you'd be fascinated to see how he literally, Ayin Beis, almost covers all of Imre Bina. The whole Mittler Rebbe Imre Bina is in Ayin Beis. Not all word for word, but there are sections that are word for word, but it's all in the Imre Bina. The Rebbe Rashab famously said, as in the Harfun cup, when he was learning Imre Bina. So you can imagine it had a big contribution. But what dilemma did Ayin Beis come to resolve that was not there in Chassidus before? So let's go back to a bigger question. What is Chassidus' dilemma? What dilemma does Chassidus come to contribute? What does the Alter Rebbe come to Mechadish with Chassidus Chabad? And I'll ask a third question. What does Kabbalah come to teach? What's felt when you learn Nigla? What's missing? Now, I'm not getting now into the Aveda part, the Pnimius, the Chayis, that without Chassidus, it's mechanical. Judaism is just a series of laws. And Chassidus gives the Neshama, V'chula V'chula, and all those aces about Chassidus. But on a more hashkafadika level. So the answer lies in Eitz Chaim, and Ayin Beis is based on this Eitz Chaim. It's a very famous Eitz Chaim, the Arizal. So what did Arizal Mechadish? One of the big chidushim of the Arizal, we all know the chidush of Tzimtzum, which I'll soon address as well. But even maybe a bigger chidush. Sure. A bigger chidush is the chidush of Keser. There's a famous Shar Mem Aleph in Eitz Chaim, where the Rebbe Rashab brings many, many times. He says the following. He asks the question, how does Elikus, I'm using the language of Chassidus, I'm not going to use the language of Kabbalah, but the teichen is, how does the Atzmus HaMaitzil connect to the world? And the answer is you need a mamutza. But what's the mamutza? A mamutza has to have 2 parts. Something from this end and something from that end. Like a maturgaman. If someone's translating between English, let's say in Hebrew, and he only knows English, it's not a mamutza. He only knows Hebrew, it's not a mamutza. So he needs to have something from both. So the Rizal says it's the level of Keser. And Keser has Atik and Arich. That's essential there. It's a famous Rizal. Some of you may be familiar. He brings all the mamutzoim in the Shtalshlus, and also even in nature. There's a mamutza between Daimim and Tzemeach, the Adnei Hasoda. There's a mamutza between Tzemeach and Chai. Between Daimim and Tzemeach is coral, the coral in the sea. On one hand is mineral, Daimim, but it grows. There's a mamutza between Tzemeach and Chai, that's Adnei Hasoda. creatures that in Mishnah and Halacha is brought that grow like a tree, but they're alive, and they cry when you kill them. And there's mamutza between Chai and Medaber, a kof, a monkey. That's what he says. There's more in Teresh about this, but I'm not going to go into all the details. You'll let them know later, right? Yeah. Anyway, so mamutza, the Arizal is mechalish mamutza. This is a big sugi in Ayin Beis, because the real dilemma, we'll put it into more. Let's put it into more practical terms. Is, can we connect with the divine? We are mortal human beings who live and die. Everything about us is gvul and limitations. The Eibishter, the Beira, and the Nivra are eshelei berach to one another. Dover Poshet. It's a creator, we're creatures. Ein Dover Eis Es Atzmei. The Eibishter is Mitzvah Matzmus. It's not even the same Geder B'chla. As Chassidus explains. So how could there be a relationship between two things that are so opposite? So the classic Jewish answer to this, without Chassidus, would be, maybe there is no relationship. The Eibishter is a melech, and you're an Evet, and that's all he wants. He created Eden to be avodim, and just follow orders. Since when does an Evet have to have a relationship with his odin? I mean, relationship in the real sense of it. Relationship is, you do a mitzvah, that's how you get connected. That's it. Nothing more. It's a good answer. And it resolves all the problems. That way the Eibishter remains Shalei Berach to us. We're in this world, and all we're given is the gift of connecting through doing a mitzvah with the Eibishter. Does the Eibishter get something from it or not? However you want to interpret it. But bottom line is there's no relationship. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is, first of all, Kra and Svara. Kra is what? The Torah is filled with mitzvahs like Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem and Yedias Hashem. These are relationship mitzvahs. If it was just mitzvahs Maisias, so then it said Eved and Odeh. An Eved is never told you have to understand your master, or you have to love your master. No, who says? An Eved is Kabbalah, Seil, and Gendikt. The Torah is filled with mitzvahs that imply, not just imply, force the issue of a relationship. And it's only Eved and Odeh. Sometimes the Eibush is referred to Av and Ben, and sometimes even as partners. Aselecha Shtei Chatzetzes, like the Rebbe Rashab and the Ayin Beis, the whole Arichas, which I'll talk about soon, is that we're like Chotzitzura, that we're like Shutfim. Shut is like Kodesh Baruch Hu b'Ma'aseh Bereishis. There's too many psukim in Chazal that do not allow us to just simply dismiss that we're just creatures, inferior creatures, that insists that we have a connection and a relationship, and we have to work on this relationship. It's not enough what you just do one day. And Eved doesn't have to work on his relationship. There's no such thing. Tomorrow he has to do more. The Melech wants him to do more. The Odin wants him to do more. In a relationship, it's a constant dynamic process. Mitzvah Sanosim Ulamod is not acceptable. It has to be Chol Yem Yeh Kachadoshim, Chadoshim, etc. That's Kra. That's the Rayas from Chazal. And then the Raya Pisechel is this. The Eibishter created us not like inanimate fools. He created us with Seichel and Midas. Why would he give us Seichel and Midas if he just wants us to basically just be Kabbalah Selniks and do Ma'aseh B'Peil all day? Clearly he wants us to use our minds and hearts to do something with it in Kedusha. Like the Rebbe would speak about Shev Mitzvahs B'Neiach, he says, Meret Mitgoyim Vegen Alts. Accept God. Business, no problem. Money, no problem. Material things, no problem. Entertainment, no problem. Comes to God, suddenly we don't talk. We're given a Meyach and a Lev, which is Keches Pnimiyim in language of Chassidus, for what? To ignore it? An Eved doesn't need a Meyach and a Lev. So clearly there's more to our relationship with the Eibishter than just an infinite distance between Beira and Nivra. Is Hadra Kursha Leduchte, how do you explain this? Now I'm giving this introduction because you can't really understand Chachsidus unless you have this introduction, and especially Ayin Beis, as you'll see in a few minutes. So, the question. So that's what's the answer to this question. So let's move on another thing. Someone could say, who says there's an answer? Maybe it's just Kol Yochel Azevil Deibishten Gendikt. Who says there has to be an answer? But if you think about it, Chassidus itself, and the Rebbe Rashab brings it from the Alter Rebbe, the Eibishter wanted things to be Api Seichel. If we don't understand the answer to this question, how a beta and nivra can have a relationship, we're back to square one. Then you don't have a relationship because you just say it's complete mystery, it's miracle. And that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is that should be a natural relationship. And Avedus Hashem, a person refines themselves. It's called Zichur Chamidus, and Birra Zichur Chamidus. You work on yourself, you become less yesh, more ayin. These are all aces from Ayin Beis, by the way. And you refine yourself to the point where you become a keli for Elikus, like he explains in Perek Lamed Vav and Lamed Zayin, to the point of that the Mashiach will come, that the world itself, like all the psukim the Alter Rebbe brings, V'nigel Kved Hashem, Even Mikir Tizak, etc., etc., that Gashmis Ha'elam will cry out Elikus. That's the kavanah. And the Eibishter wants it to be understood, because Kol Yachol, that's the Eibishter's point of view. He can do anything he wants. But then we're left out of the picture. The Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the Samach Tzaddik brings, that one of the last things he heard from the Alter Rebbe was that he said, the Eibishter could have done it without any logic. But at Gewalt, the Welt soll sein, a Seichel de Gewalt, wie Seichel is jetzt. And B'meil, that's the premise that we are allowed to ask these questions, and just don't dismiss and just say it's Kol Yachol. Take away this yisod that I just said, then learning Chassidus becomes completely unnecessary. Because it's what Kabbalah say, do what the Eibishter will. What are you trying to understand? Abeda. Ein l'chayis esek bin estartes. Was verstehst du? Was tut sich in hechere elemus, let alone in a level of the atzmus and so on. So here is the bottom line what the Arizal says. That the Eibishter wanted there should be a mamutza, a mechaber, and he created in his talshlus. I should go a step beyond that. All of this talshlus is a mamutza between a lakus and Welt. Not a mamutza chaz v'shalom mafsik. That itself is part of the divine plan. That there should be a structure. Let's use a simple example. Think of it like a ladder that you can climb and retrace the steps. So the Eibishter used the ladder to be mamshech elikus and to create a world, and we climb the same ladder to reconnect, like stepping stones. And every world and every madrega is basically a tool for us to connect. This is something. This is a shir here for shluchim and people who are yedei sefer and went to chassidus. But if you wanted to translate it for a moment to someone that's completely doesn't have any Hebrew, it's a question every thinker, every person asks. Am I just a simple inferior human being that's just going to die? Or am I going to leave something in this world that is eternal? So a skeptic or a cynic will say, no, you're a mortal person, everything dies, so will you. And the answer is absolutely not. We're given the ability to have a relationship with the divine, which is eternal, beginning by virtue of our Tzelem Elokim, Chelek Elokam and Mal Mamish, all the different aces, and by living our lives in a divine way, we become at the end of the day a channel for Elokus, and B'meila, yes, everything we do can be immortal. And not only will be rewarded, but the world will change. Mashiach is a forever experience that we will all be zeicher to. Tchis hamesim kidur the psak of chassidus neshamas begufim. I'm not going to go in more detail, but you can imagine there are many implications of such a statement because it changes your whole life. That means life is not just to be lived. I'll make some money. Chatef achel, chatef v'shti. I die, and then we move on like animals. No, life is a real serious thing. Using the aces, the kavanah of lasis leizborach dir betachtenim. But the question now is how. To say all this is very nice. The question is how, and that's where Chassidus comes in, and Ayin Beis in particular. Like the Alter Rebbe says, "Kodev elecha davar meid befichel b'avav chelasesei" is a pasuk in Chumash, Parshat Nitzavim. Eichu kodev. That's what Chassidus came. Didn't come to tell us Kodev elecha. Moshe said that, but Eichu kodev is a far harder question. Like it says sometimes, the Baal Shem Tov is gelernt as jeder eine ken dienen dem Eibishten, und der Alter Rebbe hat gewissen wie jeder eine ken dienen. And that's why you need a system. That's why Chassidus is not just one book or one maimer, because you're dealing with the complexities of life, and each of us, kol echad b'fum shiur delay. There's no one size fits all. So we need a model, and we need a blueprint for each of us to be able to climb this ladder. And no one is out of the picture. I'm going to quote a little later, but I want to show you one thing in Pedic. I don't know if it's in the booklet. Let me see. I found it just learning it. I couldn't believe what I saw, because it's like mamish. Talk about between built to the gilim. In Pedic, let me just find this. Yeah. Is Perek Reish Samach Zayin here? I don't know. Probably not. You can write it down. Perek Reish Samach Zayin, the Rebbe Rashab says the following words. He says, every Madrege in Chassidus, from the highest levels, even Yechudei Allah, that a Shayach Rak L'Neshamas Geveyas, these are his words. Kol echad ve'echad tzarech lishtadel kama she'efsher liyaz behem p'chinas riyah muchshis afila b'chol darges elu. Kol echad ve'echad or echad ve'achas. You don't find such shaynis often in Chassidus. And then he goes on and gives a moshel. How do you explain Yechudei Allah to a person who was helped barely by forget about bitla yesh to recognize their yesh? You know. So he gives a dugma just to show you one dugma in Perek Reish Chav Zayin. What did I say? Reish Samach Zayin. I'm sorry. He gives a dugma. He says, for example, when you speak, so the person who's listening, what you say is a mitzias, is a yesh. To you, speaking means nothing because your thoughts is what matters. Speech is just what you're communicating to someone else. You wouldn't have to speak if there was no one else there. So this is a dugma for Yechudei Allah, how the Eibishter sees the Welt. And he says this is a riyah muchshis, something that you found in your own personal life, a dugma for Yechudei Allah. And he says that's what's asked for every person, is to find on your level, no matter where you are, some dugma muchshis, where you could say, this is maybe a Zoyrampin, maybe Bedachlis, whatever it is, maybe in the lowest level, this is a foundational statement. Because that means there's no madrege in Chassidus that's not shaykh to all of us. No matter who we are in Yodin Benafshe. So you have to make an effort. There's no excuse to say, oh, these dargas, that's not for me. Everything, he says, you can check it out. It says, Mamish dat Loshen. I read it 5 times. I was saying, it's actually saying that, middle of a Maimon. Ayin Beis is full with such gems, by the way. You know, so long, it's like a yam, you lose it. If it was said like in 5... when you have something such an arichis, it gets lost. So let's go back now to Ayin Beis. If this is the kavanah of Kabbalah, the Kesed, the Mumutza, and this is the kavanah of Chassidus altogether, the Rebbe Rashab took upon himself the task. And we can talk later why. In that year, in Ayin Beis, was the beginning, was almost the end of being in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab, we know, established Temchet Mimim for the Melchamas that would be coming in the 20th century. So there's no question Ayin Beis was so-called the Rebbe Rashab's final so-called magnum opus. And what does he do? If you learn Ayin Beis, so let's look in the booklet. How does it begin? B'shor shekdim Yisrael Nasru Nishma Yordu Malachi Ashoras V'kosher Lehem Shnei Ksorim. Kesed. He begins with Kesed. And this will be a recurrent theme through the whole Hemshech. Through the whole Hemshech. And then he first goes the whole thing with obviously Hagdama and answer all the questions on the Medrash, Kedrogel in a Maimorim. I'm not going to go over that because that you could all do your own. But then if you go to the bottom of the page, Aleph, Mamish, the first page, here's 3, but it's the first page in Ayin Beis. So what does he say? He goes through the Kesed, and he says, B'chlolos, there's 3 Ksorim. And then starts the Hine Isa B'Pardes. Now, if you just learn this, you probably won't recognize, but if you start learning the whole Hemshech Ayin Beis, Pardes, Arizal, is thrown all over the place. I started even making a list. I think that Rebbe Rashab Pasha brings almost the whole Pardes and almost all the Kisvei Arizal. However, very briefly. And he did it, you can see he's taken the whole panorama of Kabbalah and bringing it. And here he starts, Isa B'Pardes, Shar HaKinuyim, Erech Kesed, V'zel Shene. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically the Pardes says that there are 3 meanings in Kesed. One, Loshen Shtika, silence. The second, Loshen Machtir, Atorah, like a crown. And the third one, Loshen Machtir, Torah as a crown, and third one is Meloshem Meseviv, that it surrounds. These are the 3 Perushim in Pardes. If you look at it, you'll see it's very thorough and detailed. The Rebbe Rashab goes through all the details. This is what he begins with. 3 Ksorim. 3 meanings in Kesed, I should say. Now remember, Kesed is the Mamutza between Ein Sof and the Elamus. So you can imagine these 3 meanings are going to reveal to us that Mamutza. Now, just to give you the scope, how complicated this gets, then after he finishes, you go to page Beis, Ayin Beis, go to the next page. So the third Pirush, Loshen Sivuv. Then he says, "By Inyan who the Hini Yadua the B'chinas HaKesed B'chal who B'chinas HaRotzen The Kesser B'chlal is the level of desire, Rotzen. And as he explains, in other words, everything in life, let's take a dugma mukhshis from ourselves. Before you do something, you have to want to do it. If you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it. You want to build a house, so first there's wanting doing it, and then there's actualizing it. There's anything. You want to come to the Kinus HaShluchim, first you have to want, then you do it. So Rotzen is the first step in any movement. Like the Rotzen Lahaitzel. V'chein kesed de bria, hu Rotzen livrei elam abriya. V'chein b'chinas aksorim aprotim. And then he goes, there's also ksorim klolim, b'chinas ak. Nikra kesed legabe kol seishtalshlus. So think of it this way: a melech runs a medina. So he has a chief of staff, and the chief of staff, his role is one thing only: is to represent the Ratzon of the melech. But then the chief of staff has a lot of jobs to be done. Here you have to deliver the mail. Here there's a battle to be fought. Here you have to pass laws, collect taxes. So you have, like in any company, you have the heads of departments, and then there's a head over all the heads of the departments. So basically, as the Rebbe Rashab continues to explain, Ak is the world of the chief of staff, is the Ratzon for everything. And then Ak instructs, Keser of Atzilus, create Atzilus. Keser of Bria, to create Bria. Not getting down to the distinction between the elements. But that's the Keser Koli. So all this goes back to one word, Ratzon. The Ratzon HaMelech. So he goes, Ak, Konikra Keser Koli, Shemimeno Ulamata. Mishnah Sodim, rather. The Ak, who Keser Arich, Uchinas Arich, the Dal El Mesabiyah. You'll see here the thoroughness. You'll see he quotes part of it so far, Mishnah Sidim, then he's going to start quoting Zoyars. The Rebbe Rashab is as thorough as it gets. You have everything you need about Keser and Rotzen right here. All the Makedas. He doesn't even say anything, doesn't rely that you're relying on him, that the Rebbe Rashab knows it. He brings the sources and so on. And then he continues, the Zoyar is the Rotzen. I'm just jumping a bit. So now comes the third level of Rotzen. Now what? There's the Rotzen for each world. There's the Rotzen Koli Ak. And then there's the Rotzen HaPoshet in Eid Sof. And there again, the Chol Zeh b'chinas Keser b'chol madreges chol madrege u'madrege shekel ba'atzlei kol masha ola b'chinas Rotzen Zeh. So Rotzen is essentially defined as an all-encompassing force that desires something. Everything included in that Rotzen is in every detail that will come out of that Rotzen is included in that Rotzen. That's the definition of Keser. Now I went to look. Where is this? Does this say anywhere in Chassidus beforehand? Now you may have heard this. We heard Rotzen. I'll take questions at the end. So I shouldn't. We've heard the question of Rotzen, but I've not found. Even the Alter Rebbe, he says Keser is Rotzen, but no one goes into detail that the Rotzen for each world, and there's the Rotzen Koli of Ak, and there's the Rotzen HaPoshet. This is quintessential Rebbe Rashab, being thorough and giving you the whole picture, which immediately opens up your eyes. And we're not just talking about, someone reads Eitz Chaim, forget about it. You don't know what he's talking about. What's Keser? He doesn't even say Rotzen. It's a complete cryptic word. Chassidus at least translates Keser as Rotzen. But the question is, what's Rotzen also? And how far does it go? So right here, the Rebbe Rashab established that's the Rotzen for everything. So I'll just use it again. Let me just see if I want to read a little more here. 1 second. Yeah, there he goes. Now he adds, so why is it called Keser? Well, Keser is a crown. Or surrounds. Why is it surrounds? It's Rotzen because after the desire is fulfilled, the desire still remains. However, it's not in the details. It hovers above it as it encompasses the whole thing. Now think of it like this. I'll use an example. You're all shluchim of the Rebbe. The Rebbe had a Rotzen. Whenever that Rotzen was all b'retzeinei, to establish shlichus. And then he made it clear that's what he wants. Then different individuals chose to embrace it and became mobilized. Everyone went out on their shlichus. The Rotzen of the Rebbe continues to be there right now as well, because you wouldn't do it without that Rotzen. So where's the Rotzen of the Rebbe in you? it hovers above it. Because right now you're involved in your detailed shlichus in your particular mokim, in this zman, and so on. But the Ratzon is there all the time. Why is this so important? Because you talk about a mamutza. If we're going to have a relationship with Eibishter, you can't just say, oh, God wanted to create a world and then He's no longer involved, so to speak. Or His Ratzon was fulfilled. No. The Ratzon remains hovering all the time. So now when someone's working in a field for the Melech, or someone else is delivering the mail, or someone's preparing the food, they may not know the whole depth and the power of the Ratzon of the Melech, but they're fulfilling exactly what he wanted, and his Ratzon remains. That's what's called Makiv. Because they may not be aware of it, but it's there. It's clearly there. It's the driving force. And then he continues on to explain. It gets a little deeper now when he starts explaining what it means Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. And you'll see I'm just jumping a bunch of lines. I want to go to one line, one key thing here. The line begins, it's like halfway down. Chulu. So now he also introduces, we know Kesed, another name for Kesed in Kabbalah is eagle. So all the Igulim are Mushrish in the eagle HaGadol, the first Kesed, which is the first Ratzon. So right here, if you didn't decipher it in simple English, it's a cryptic language. Igulim, Yesher, Kesed, Sfiris. But in Chassidus adds the word it's Ratzon and the Pratim of the Ratzon. So then he goes on. V'zeu sha'kesed b'chol mokim hu mevchines memutza u'k'may kesed atziluf hu memutza bein ha'maitzel and atzolim v'chein b'chol madrega anal ha'kesed ha'memutza v'chein gam be'elmes ha'biyah the malchus atziluf shenase the parentheses. I'm skipping after the parentheses. V'hainu sh'aydei seidah s'harotzen kavyochel nasim. Here's the key. If the Baal HaRatzon did not have a desire for something, you would have no connection to him. So that's why Kesed is, as Eitz Chaim says, the ultimate mamutza. And then he continues on. He gives al derech mashal ba'adam lamata. The kedem sheneseder be'ezeh ratzon le'ezeh davar harihu muvdal memenu legamri. Ve'ein le'shayches klal lezeh. Like I said before, if you have no desire to meet me, you have no desire to walk here, to go there, there's no connection between us. Between you and the object. But, so that's what he says, Ein Shayches. How do you move the men of the grammar? Ein Shayches kal kashen nesed. Or kashen nesed, but that's not how you begin Shayches. The relationship has been established. Like Kablu Malchusei. Okay. Or Kaneda, the Ratzon Ulosh and Merutza. And then he continues and elaborates on this. And then he says, I'm just jumping a few lines. So right away you have to stop here and say, we all know Kedim is not in time, because there's no time, it's concept. And this requires its own discussion. You know, if I had any say about chinuch, how we teach our children or ourselves chassidus, to begin with a major hakdama. We think everything in terms of time and space. I refer you to Nocha Pedig. Pedig Mem Hey. Is it here? Again, I don't know if it's in here. Couldn't include everything. Is it Mem Hey? No, Mem Gimel. Sorry. Pedig Mem Hey, the Rebbe Rashab says also something very powerful. He talks about Zman HaMokim, and he says that the hasaga of a human being, no human being can understand something outside of time and space. That's what he says. You know, which was very, when I remember learning it and teaching it, it was very validating, because you finally say why it's so difficult to understand Ruchnis. Because he says clearly, we think in terms of time and space. When someone says before, what does it mean? It means a minute ago, or a day ago, or a year ago, or 100 years ago. The concept of Kedim in Ruchnis requires a lot of mind bending. Like what happened exactly before Bereshis Bara Elokim? We're told Zman is Anivra. Okay, so now try to visualize. So what happens? If you were there that first second, what happened? So you say, nothing happened, because man itself is Anivra. That's, we'll throw that out. But can you imagine that? Is it possible to imagine? Let's say you travel with a spaceship into outer space, and you go and go and go. Is there a place where Mokim will stop? Okay, so the wise guys will say, okay, because the world's like a circle, so you don't stop, you just hit the top, and you just keep going around, and you think you're moving. But who says? Lav Dafke. And we say, L'mayla megalgal achi ein mokim. The Rebbe Rashab makes it very clear that no person could understand what that means. So then the question, of course, is how do we talk about these things? Because once you know you can't understand it, that's when you start understanding it. The problem is we're convinced that we have a perception of things. So we think in terms of time and space in very tangible ways. So it's critical Hakdama Chassidus is to know how to think non-spatially. You could say, okay, give me a dogma for that. So the Rebbe Rasha brings later from the Maimer Seis Tossis in the Likutei Torah, one of the examples, how many ideas fit into your brain? A brain is the size of the palm of your hand, around this size. Let's say a little bigger. Okay? How many ideas can fit into your brain? We know when you buy a computer, at 10 gig, what is after gig? Trigabytes. There's a limit. There's a point where it's out of memory. What about your mind? Have any of you reached that level yet? I know some people think that when they hear one thing, they're already out of memory. But you know what I mean. How far can you push yourself? No one has a clue. No rabbi, no mashpia, and no scientist either. All in one brain. So Alter Rebbe says, he doesn't say these aces, but he says, how do all these ideas reside? Do they live near each other? How big is an idea? Is an idea take an inch, a quarter of an inch, a centimeter, the size of a hair, a microscopic particle? Again, no one has a clue. So he gives a dogma there of the Mailam and Mokim in Mokim, because in Mokim. So my point here is, it's not Pshat trying to tell us that we can't get these things. The problem is that we're confident that we get things altogether. The first thing you have to know, like the Rebbe once told somebody to learn Tanya, he came back and the Rebbe said, "No, how's it going?" It was early years, maybe before the Nesius. I heard it from Rabbi Leibel Posner, and the Rebbe said, he said to the Rebbe, "I don't understand a word in Tanya." So the Rebbe said, "That's a good beginning. You know, that's the first step." Then the Rebbe said, "In nicht verstehen sind wir alle gleich." In not understanding we're all equal. The question is, some of us understand a little more. Now, the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe brings in the Likutei Torah as well, later in Ayin Beis, that through enough Yediyas Hashlili you could almost figure out Chiyuv. I want to give an example for this. The reason I went off on a tangent is because you say Kedem Alei Sarotzen, and we just say it so easily. You have to really stop when you hear that. What means Kedem Alei Sarotzen? There was no Zman. So what's Kedem? So the answer is, the Eibus, as I said, wanted a structured Seicheldik system. So B'mele he made levels. They don't have to take time, they're just levels. They could all be existing same time. But it's levels that we climb, like Mokim, Losh and Maila, Zman is Kedima V'ichur. Like when we say a father and a son, we all know a father is older than a son. It's a klal. Born before, and the son is younger. What about Av and Tulda in Halacha? Ovis Malachis and Tuldas? Is the Tulda born after the Av? Not Avka. As soon as there's an Av Malach, there's a Tulda. The only thing is, a Tulda is a Teitzah of the Av. So in time, they both can be the same time. This forces you to start thinking in Mokim and Zman that's not in a Gashmizdik way. Later in Ayin Beis, we'll bring another mashal. It's also in Tafresh Nun. In case you learn Tafresh Nun. So in Tafresh Nun, he says, to give a tzir of ruchnius, he says like this. Imagine you're looking at, I think he even brings a tapuach, an apple. You look at a physical apple. You reckon the color, the shape, it looks juicy, all the elements of sight. Then you close your eyes and you're mitzayah what you just saw. You could see, you could describe exactly, you said it was red, it was this size, it looked like that. Every detail you can mitzayah. What are you being mitayah? So he says that's ruchni shebegashmis. You're being mitayah the ruchni of a gashmi. So I remember you think about it and say, oh, a second, that's pretty hard to figure out. Now if that's asiya ruchnius, go figure out what yitzira ruchnius is like. We can't even imagine an apple is already hard to figure out. That would be like imagining the imagination of an apple. And then Bria would be the imagination. So you already understand Wumahalt in the Welt. We're basically Mugashamim. We think in Gashmizdik terms all the time, and we don't relate to Ruchnis. That's the real truth. We sense it. But it takes Aveda, it takes a mind to retrain your mind. That's why when we learned Chassidus the first time, when we were 13, 12, 14, the Bar Mitzvah Maimer, the Tanya, you don't understand it then, and frankly we don't understand it later either. The only difference is we think we understand it later. What's the problem? Because we learn it, like a guy told me when I remember started doing my Life Sunday night. So a guy wrote to me like cynically, he says, yeah, That's great. I know from Yeshiva, Lamates Malachis and Esses Spirus and Dalet Elmas. I angehakt all in one pekel. He knows the numbers. Because we are so trained to think Gashmizdik, so when you learn Shulchan Aruch, for example, and Nigla, everything is Gashmiz. There's no Ruchnius there. It's deep. And you understand the Svaris and the arguments. But no one forces you to think out of time and space. As soon as you get to Chassidus, it's out of time and space. Rabiel would always ask us, remember the early years, when the youngest kids, when we were kids, welche Jahrhundert gewend the Tzimtzum Arishan? What century was the Tzimtzum Arishan? And one Chacham got up and said, he thinks it was the 5th or 6th century. Why Punk then? I don't know. Churban Beis Hamikdash maybe. Yeah. And where exactly, he didn't ask this question, but the follow-up question is, where exactly is Atzilus? Between Saturn and Jupiter, maybe. Why? Because that's how we think. I mentioned this many times, just as a dugma. When people ask, where does a neshama go after Mei Vesin? Everyone asks this question. Think about the question for 2 seconds. And the answer will be that the whole question is based on a false assumption. It's based on, what's your axiom, your muskulition? I am here. So I'm wondering where a soul goes. I'm where it's at. And the soul went off somewhere. What about electricity, a refrigerator asking electricity, where do you go when they pull the plug? And what's electricity going to answer? What do you mean, where I go? Where'd you come from? They just invented you 100, 200 years ago, a little box. You refrigerate food, and now you ask me where I come from. I go back to where I always was before I was contained by your little box, which is beyond physical time and space. As soon as you hear that, everyone smiles and everyone says, of course. So you see, that's how mesubed we are to Gashmizdika terms. So I want to go back now. This is a little aside from where we are, but it's not aside because Ayin Beis talks about this in the Perek I mentioned and more prakim. But he does it in a very, as I said, develops it in time. So now, where were we here? So he speaks about that the Shaykhis, Keser, basically, think of it one word. Let's get rid of the word Keser for a moment. And the word Rotzen even. It's Shaykhis. A Shaykhis from the Eibishter to us is when the Eibishter desired existence and desired you and I. Which again, as Shluchim, is very enriching because the Rebbe chose you as a Shliach. That Rotzen makes a connection. Someone said, you have a comparison between you and the Rebbe? No, but he wants us. So it doesn't make a difference. The Rotzen makes the Shaykhis. And that's where he continues and starts talking about the Mamutza. Now, I'm not going to read till the end of the chapter. You can read it on your own. And I'm just trying to point out the Machalach here. Now, what happens next? So just to show you that this is not a small matter. It's not like it's over with. Now that we understand Keser is also finished. And then Ayin Beis can finish after Perek Aleph. What happens next? So I'll just give you a little scope here. It was overwhelming to me, so now you can be overwhelmed. Still overwhelming. Here, for 45 chapters now, Perek Beis, it says, V'hini Yadua, Perek Beis, Hini Yadua B'chinas Er Makiv. 45 chapters, the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain Er Makif, but not with Er Makif. He's going to explain for 45 chapters what's Er Pnimi. And Perek Mem Vov, he'll come back. And now that we understand Er Pnimi, now we're going to understand Er Makif. Can you imagine? You see what kind of a journey this is? 45 chapters, not even get to the answer of what Kesed is. That's the structure of Ayin Beis. That's how it works. I'll just lay it out a little in case you want to see the binyan. Yeah, Perek Aleph to Mem Hayz Eir Pnimi. And Arich is Gedele. What means Eir is Pnimi? In other words, what does it mean? Not the Rotzen that the Eibishter has, the Shaykhis that's established between us and the Eibishter. What's the structure look like? So for 45 chapters, the Rebbe Rashab lays out the structure of existence. That's Eir Pnimi. Because structure of existence we can relate to a lot easier. For example, like he gives the example of Keiches Pnimim. Eir Hariyeh b'klei ha'ayin. Eir ha'shmiyeh b'klei ha'ezen. Everything is localized, everything is defined. Even though it's still complicated to understand how our faculties work, but it's something you can tangibly touch. Rotzen you cannot touch. Like I said, Rotzen remains hidden. The desire for you to be here, that is not something we can access easily. It created the first connection because, as I said, without Rotzen there's no connection. But Pnimi is where things play itself out. Pnimi is the structure of life, the structure of existence. Now all this I'm specifically using simple English Because that's exactly what it means. It's not a kunz. I'm not like translating sort of new words. The Chassidus is like Kabbalah, but not as much. Ultimately, code words. The word Keser, the word even Rotzen. Until you hear the word Shaykhis, it still remains a very mysterious word. And Pnimi is where the structure plays itself out. Then what happens after Perek Memvav? Just in case you think it's over then, it's not. In Perek Memvav until Perek Kuf Chavav, well, how is that? How much is that? 80 chapters. Goes back to Makif and the effect of Makif on our lives. So, first he explains the effect of Pnimi in our lives and then the effect of Makif. What does this mean in simple English? So let me see what parakim I chose here. Beis. What's Mem Beis? I'll get to Mem Beis in a minute because we'll soon deal with that. Okay. Just looking at the time. So, what does this mean in simple basis? Let me, actually, I'll give you further structure and then I'll go back to it. What happens at Perek Kuf Chavav? That's when it begins Shavuos Ayin Gimel, which is the next year, chapter 127, through Perek Kuf Nun Ches, is the effect of and the difference between Pnimi and Makif on our lives. So the first 126 chapters is the meaning of Makif and Pnimi and Makif. Then its effect on our lives is discussed in Perek Kuf Chav to Perek Kuf Nun Ches. And then he begins to discuss the actual, how do you now access these levels in a application type of way. What's the Aveda consist of? And that will go from Perek Kuf Nun Tes to Perek Kuf Pei Gimel. He talks about Teira and all the Mumutzoyim, Keser, Atzilus, Ak, and then comes the big Chiddush of Chok Mistemah. I'm laying it out. I'll go back to it in a few minutes. Then Perek Kuf Pei Daled, Perek Reish Chav Tes, Havaya Alkei Ater Rememcho Yasiso Pella. There's a whole further discussion of how the conscious and the unconscious, basically where Makif meets Pnimi, because that's going to be the ultimate dilemma here. Because it's fine to say that Keser is a Mamutza, but then the Mamutza itself only carries over the question. Remember I said if the Eibush is a Beta, it's Ein Sof. The Welt is Gvul. So, okay, fine. So you found that in Keser has part of Bli Gvul, part of Gvul. But how in Keser itself, how does the Bli Gvul in Keser meet the Gvul of Keser? The Rebbe Rashab has on this a whole Arichas Gdela, which will, and I'm going to sum it up soon. I'm just giving the lay of the land. Then goes Reish Chav Tes to Reish Samach Gimel is the structure of Teyu and Tikkun, which, as you'll see in a few minutes, is the operational way that a healthy world versus an unhealthy world. You can say a dysfunctional life versus a functional life. And then goes the whole Arichas. He begins the meaning of Bittul, because the secret to all of this is Bittul. That goes from Reish Samach Gimel to Reish Ayin Ches. And then, starts volume 2, where he goes deeper into the meaning of Bittul, and then comes the two main ways of we being Bittul into this world. Mamata L'mayla through davening, and Mamayla L'mata through Teira. As I said, I'll sum it up soon in more detail. Let me go back for a moment. So if the Kesed is the Mamutza and the Shaykhis, the problem is obviously, it's not so simple. Because as I said before, you can perform a mitzvah and you got connected to the Eibishter. So what's nach davon haben? You did the mitzvah. The Ratzon Hashem was that you should exist. The Ratzon Hashem was you should do a mitzvah. So now you're connected once you mekayim the mitzvah. But as I said before, the Eibishter wants a relationship. How does Meichen and Midas get into the picture? And here's the dilemma of how you bring these two together. And that's why the Eidos Cheiches Pnimim is so vital. The Rebbe Rashab says, I can't say it's a chiddush from the Rebbe Rashab, but it's definitely elaborated that ultimately, even Pnimi is really a teitzah of Makif. What that means is, but who wanted the Pnimi? The Rotzen. So, in essence, I don't know if this is a mind bender or not, but in essence, Pnimi, from the Eibishter's point of view, is just another aspect of his Rotzen. So the way the Rebbe Rashab puts it is, so Gvul is really just another manifestation of Bli Gvul. We don't see it that way, but the Eibishter sees it that way. So B'meila, ultimately our structure of existence is really just another expression of bli gvul, except it looks to us like gvul. You ever hear the word that when Alter Rebbe would eat begashmis, so Chassidim said this was the koyach hagvul of Ein Sof. So Rebbe Rashab doesn't bring the story, but he explains that the koyach hagvul of Ein Sof is really the koyach habli gvul that just looks like gvul. Why is this so important? Because when we look at our lives, what is the real dilemma? How does gvul meet bli gvul, right? The problem is really only from our point of view, because we don't see them as compatible. In Atzmus, bli gvul and gvul are compatible. They're not only compatible, they don't exist there. The problem is, how can we relate to that? So basically, what he says is that Eibishter gave us chokhmah and wisdom to help us understand things that we think we're understanding, but in truth is, he's basically giving us a way to relate to bli gvul through our seichel and midas. This is a big chiddush in Ayin Beis. And essentially what he says is the seichel that we think we have, we think seichel. It's not really seichel. He says it's really pnimius atik. It's kesed that looks like seichel. So for our point of view, it looks like we're intelligent people, and we understand the universe in a structured way. And the kavanah is to climb the ladder and come to realize that chokhmah and wisdom is sachakel, just a lakus, camouflaging like intelligence. Now, I think you probably appreciate what that means. That means that we consider ourselves intelligent human beings. You know, we have maskilim, there's evdim, seichel. The Rebbe Rashab basically establishes the whole structure of existence that we see is not an illusion, but it's limited, and we think it's a structure when in truth is just another manifestation of bli gvul. This is the big part of the first volume of Ayin Beis. So how does a person come to that? The answer is bittul. Because without bittul, you remain trapped. Remember the refrigerator analogy I gave? Why does the refrigerator not understand where electricity goes? Because it's filled with its own consciousness. Why is it that we cannot? Why do we argue with each other? Can't we coexist? The Rebbe Rashab says very clear, because your mitzias is what fills you up, and you don't have room for somebody else. Your perspective. Bittul means that you're able to see a perspective that's not your own. And this is the real second half of the first volume, where he goes into the whole difference between Teyu and Tikkun. Moichin is by nature bottle. Midas by nature is yesh. Why? Because midas is what I feel. I like this, I don't like it. I'm attracted to it, I'm repelled by it. Like he says in Tanya, in Perek Tes, what does he say? That midas is impulsive. It's impulses. If we were Bali midas without any meichin, whatever would attract you, that's what you'd be drawn to. Meich shalat al-lev. Meich says, you know what? Let me think about it. Let me reflect. So meichin is by nature a bittul dika existence, because it's the bridge. And this is the chiddush of the Rebbe Rashab. Says that not kesed is the mamutza, like the Arizal says. It's chokhmah stima in kesed. Chokhmah stima in kesed is where Ratzon translates into unconscious wisdom, and then the unconscious wisdom translates into conscious wisdom, and that's where we're trapped. And with bittul, you could open the door and reconnect from the conscious wisdom, which is chokhmah gluya, to unconscious wisdom, which connects you to the market itself, to Ratzon itself. And bittul is the key. And with that, the Rebbe Rashab lays out the whole history of it by saying the Ovis, until Matan Torah, their job was to realign the universe to the Sheirish of Pnimi, which means Chetei Tzadas and all the Chatoim afterwards, like in Bas Ligani, the Medrash, the 7 generations of a Yerida, or Istalkus of the Shechina, and their job was to realign the Gvul of Welt, Kel Shaddai, Meloshen Dai, Hagbola, to realign it to the Koyach HaGvul of Ein Sof, to the edge where Koyach HaGvul meets Koyach HaBli Gvul. And then Matan Torah introduces Koyach HaBli Gvul Ha'er Chodesh, which is the beginning of the Achonah to Mashiach, where Bli Gvul and Gvul become one. Now, I don't know if I lost you or I didn't lose you, but the bottom line is that Rebbe Rashab lays all this out in very detailed expression. And even though we're talking language of Chassidus here, the truth is, all this can be explained in very palatable terms, which I'll do in a few minutes. I just want to finish a little more of the structure here. So then he describes that there's 2 types of realities. One we're very familiar with, and that's where people argue, and everything clashes with each other. It's a world of war, chaos. In Ruchnis, in Gedusha, that's called Elam Ateu. Where the Sfiris, he says, suffer from two problems. One problem is that they don't tolerate each other. And number two, they don't give and take from each other. There's no mashpia makabel. How is that remedied? He says through bittul. Shema. Shema remedies it. And he says the first problem is the problem of the Eidus, and the second problem is the problem of the Kalim. The Eidus are very intense, and therefore they don't tolerate each other. Chesed is chesed. I'm not interested in Gevurah. Kalim is where there's a give and take, and the Kalim of Tayu obviously shatter. They don't give and take. In Tikkun, that's repaired. Then he goes into a whole discussion, which I think can be mamash a book that anyone can read on the concept of how do you moderate conflict management, shalom bayis. Two people who are at total war with each other. I'll just use a Gashmizik example. They don't talk to each other. They don't even want to look at each other. I hope nobody never has had this experience, but I like that it exists. Okay, and now you're trying to make some shalom. What's the first step? So he says the first step is you got to get them into one room, even if they don't agree. You just got to subside their anger, and just you know what? You don't have to accept the other person. You don't have to listen. Just sit in the same room. You have to weaken. They call it chalishus ha'eris. You have to weaken the energy, the output of energy that each of them is exuding. Then comes the second step, is that you begin speaking and seeing can one person speak to the other. So Mamish, he goes through steps and he talks literally different approaches of dysfunctionality where things don't communicate, and how in Tikkun everything reconnects. Because this is the problem with the Gvul and Bli Gvul. It's not just that Gvul and Bli Gvul don't meet. Once the Gvul gets convinced that it's a Gvul, my turf is not your turf. Ani ba'av se'ed. Maybe I'll give you something if you give me something in return. So bittul is the key to reconnecting, first of all, the Gvul of Welt to the Gvul of Elokus, and the Gvul of Elokus to the Bli Gvul of Elokus. Which is really, as he put it very clearly, he says clearly, this is a Chiddush in Ayin Beis, I'll soon get to that as well, that the Gvul is an extension of Bli Gvul. Now, as I said, because of time, I can't really, to learn too much inside is going to be a little too complicated. But everything I'm saying here is from the Prakim that are here, and obviously from other Prakim as well. But I want to say the following. Samach Vov and Ayin Beis now. And the Rebbe is, ultimately, why Lamed Zayin, I don't know that year, Dafke, but what was the big Chiddush of Ayin Beis? So, those of you who may have learned Samach Vov will know that the main theme of Samach Vov, to use an expression, is Ben Shenasa Eved. Which means that even if you're a Ben, a Neshama is like a Ben, and it's Adam Alelian, and it has similarities to Lakus, but the ultimate is Aved B'Keich Atzmei, and to come to a level of Ben Shenasa Eved, that you serve the Eibishter with Kabbalah Seil. Big part of Samach Vov, Yigiyah and Kabbalah Seil, which means you break yourself. I just saw literally a Sikha. What is it? I think maybe not Yud Shvat, Yud Beis Tammuz Yud Daled. It's about Shlichus. And the Rebbe says there that Samach Vov, state in Samach Vov, as the Ikke Kavone, he talks about Shluchim, is Satan does was we will nishtan. He's speaking about people who are resisting going on Shlichus. So the Rebbe says in Samach Vov state that the Ikke Satan was we will nishtan. So if you don't want to go, that's exactly what you should be doing. Obviously, this doesn't mean everything you don't want to do is something you should be doing. It means that sometimes the thing that's most important you don't want to do. And that's the kavanah. Why am I mentioning it? Because I was learning Samach Vov. It's actually one line from the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe in Tovkuf Samach Vov, where he says exactly that. The Kol Yedidus Neshama Lamata is Lasis Masha Ein Ritzena Lasis. That which you don't want to do. Break yourself. And that Shvira, that Shinui, Harotzen is what breaks open all the world. Bittul, basically. Okay. Samach Vov brings Barichas Gdela the Shitta that, in Chassidus brings two Shittas about Eris. Does Eir have in it particles? We know that Eris and Kalim, let's say, so the Kalim create Chesed, Gvura. The question is, let's use a human example. We know the eye creates sight. What about the Koyach Hariyah? Koyach Hariyah, as it is in the Nefesh, does that have any seer to it? Eris Mitsuyarim or not? So there's more than two, but generally two shittas. Either is Eres Mitziyarim or Eres not Mitziyarim. In Samach Vav, he goes according to the Shita, it's Eres Pshutim. And the Tziyur happens primarily in the Keli. That is a famous example. Think of colorless water in tinted glasses. So it looks to the eye like the water is now green or red or orange, when in truth the water has no color, but when it goes into a glass it looks like a color. That's the Shita of Eres Pshutim. And Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab, I count at least 40 times that I saw it. He says, when the Rebbe Rashab emphasizes it that many times, means something. So there's no question that this lies the big difference between Samach Vav and Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis, if your Samach Vav is Ben Shanas Eved, let's say Ayin Beis is Eved Shanas Ben. Basically, in Samach Vav, the main kavanah, obviously there's iskalus and they overlap. The main thing is the halom and matul amayla. How we go out of our mitzias, out of tziyur to pshitus. Eres pshutim. And Ayin Beis is exact opposite. It's teira, not tefillah. How you mamshich in mechin and midas and pnimi, you mamshich bli gvul. Tziyur. That tziyur itself is an expression of lamayla mitziyur. This is the key distinction between these two hamshechim. You can see when you learn it well, you can see it keeps coming up. Because the Rebbe Rashai always says, Ushita Khan is Fi Ashita of Eres Mitziyarim. Now, this is not just a distinction, but Pashtas, the reason is because once he finished Naim in Samach Vav laying out, so to speak, the Aveda for Ares game for Zich, he comes back now, the Aveda of Birur, of bringing it back into Zich. So I was thinking about it because Lamed Zayin, when the Rebbe said the Sikha of Ayin Beis, the Sikha before, I went to look, what's the Sikha before the Ayin Beis Sikha? Sometimes, looking at association, what was the Rebbe speaking about right before? A whole Sikha about Mashpim. Bezeh Loshen, the Rebbe says, Stach Yutas Kislev, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, Darf man doch fort etwas tun für Chassidus. That's the Rebbe's words. But alone tells you woman gehalten. Darf fort etwas tun für Chassidus. And what did the Rebbe say? He wants to reignite the union of Mashpim. And he goes the whole thing that the Rebbe Rashab wanted Mashpim to be everywhere and Lo Yistayim Milsa because of the wars and all that. And he wants to reinstate it. And then the next sikh is Ayin Beis. You could say it's two separate things, but they both were chedushim of that fabring. So I was thinking about it, especially here Kinus Ashluchim, the Rebbe Sikha as Ashliach. Was tut you want to maybe do something that's comfortable. So the Rebbe name Lech Lachem Artzecho, do exactly what's not comfortable. Go away from your comfort zone and go Ares from Zich. That's Samach Vav. Ayin Beis is the second step. They made the theme of this Kinus as Ich Formetayich. That's a very different Tenuah. That first one is more like a bitl and a Kabbalah sale, which is the first initial step. But when the Rebbe says the words Ashlucha Shalom Kamesei, that's a lotion of Achdus, not a lotion of Ares Gem Fizich. That as you are Shliach, Mr. Kamesei from the Mashaleach. So that's a Hamshacha, that's Achdus. So if Ayin Beis is bitl, says if Samach Vav is Ares Gem Fizich, Ben Shanas Eved, Ayin Beis is Eved Shanas Ben. Which means that it's not just you sit on your shlichus and you feel constantly the difficulties, how far I am, etc. That ultimately you learn that this is exactly where the Rebbe is with you. So it's not like you're saying like the Maisa with the Alter Rebbe to become a Balagola. That's Kabbalah sale. To be a Balagola for 20 years, that's not a simple thing. But what happens? You find out you're not a Balagola. You become a leader of your empire and your community. You're respected. Even though Yodin is Benafshe, and you sometimes smile to yourself, I hope you still do that, and don't take yourself so seriously. Here we can talk between us, right? But you're now a Godel Beard. It's like Kapashmacher. And not only that, you represent the Rebbe, the Lubavitch of this community, etc., etc. This is Mamish, the second half, where it goes in Siyur, you have Elikus. So the first one is Ares Gem from Siyur, which is obviously a first step. And here's the second step. Now, the Rebbe's Lashon, when he said, as Ayin Beis in the Floyes, Legabed in the Floyes of Samach Vav, I was thinking, why did the Rebbe use that Lashon? It's a nice Lashon, but the Rebbe's Lashon. It's not just a cliche. So we know, Eren in the Floyes is a Lashon. But then I was learning, a number of months ago, I mentioned Kiosisa Pella. There's a whole piece in Ayin Beis where he talks that there's two dargis in the floors. Mamish, the Teichen, the Rebbe said, it's not Stam Alosh. One darga of Pella, and it's actually two Pirushim Mizoya, the Rebbe Rashab says. One darga is, Pella, what's Pella mean? A wonder, right? So you can have wonder, he says it's a Helam Sheyeshnu B'Mitzias. What does that mean? That you are a person that understands things, and then suddenly something surprising happens, right? So it's a Pella. A Pella. Then he says there's a Ayin of a Pella Be'etzem. What's a Pella Be'etzem? That it's not Pshat L'Fiyerech Yud. He gives the example. For example, let's say when you say, someone tells you that someone was in this room now, and they left the room. So they're not, you can't see them. But they're shaykh to be found. Then there's a thing that's Nifla Be'etzem. As much as you go, it's Be'etzem, not shaykh to Gili. So there's a Gili, there's a Helen that's not, it's Papayil, not Begili. But if you work hard, you could be reveal it. You know, like potential, let's say. We all have certain potential. It's a matter of revealing the potential. Then there's a Helam Atzmi. There are things that no matter how much you work, you'll never reveal it. It always remains a Pella B'etzem. And Rebbe Rashab says, this is two levels of Chochmas Timah, which to him ultimately becomes the key to the interface, to the Mamutza, Keser. Chochmas Timah, which your mind, your Chochma knows, you know, when an idea falls in your head, why do we call it Chochma? Keyach Ma. Where did that idea come from? You know, people wonder. Ideas come into your head. Remember the last time an idea came to you? You know? So some people say ideas, where do they come from? They come from the shower head. That's what someone told me. Because that's where all my ideas come from. I'm in the shower. I get all my ideas. Right when I can't write it down. You know? And then I come out, I forget everything. Where do ideas come from? So it's like the example is given of a flash. There you go. A flash. It's like a flash. Why? Like a Boraka Mavrik. Because the idea came and you can't put your finger on it. The answer is very simple. It's coming from an unconscious place, and what you sense is a one drop that came out of a big mayon, so to speak. You think of it like a faucet, one drop. So you know on the other side of the wall, there's definitely a whole bunch of information, but you can't access it. That he calls Chochmas Timah of Arich. That's shaykh to us. So it's a matter of working harder where you can reveal it. Yegiyah, for example. When you learn, let's say, Gemara or Shtikl Teira, whatever it may be, right now you don't understand it. You work harder, you reveal that which was Behelim yesterday became Begili today. Then he says there's a darga that always remains Nifla. No matter what happens, you always are one. It's always a wonder. And he says, interesting thing, that in a relationship with Eibishter, you have to have both. Because if you get too comfortable with it, then it's not Elikus anymore. That's why the Mamutza, you need both. You need something that you can access with work, and there's something that always remains beyond. Now let's talk as Chassidim, as Shluchim, the Rebbe. So there are things we understand from the Rebbe. The Rebbe explained himself. He gave us Siches, Mamorim, he explained. But we all know, whatever is explained, there's always an element of Dvavar Nifla, Niflois, that we'll never understand. Not because we're not smart enough, because Be'etzem, it's L'mayla Megili. And that too is part of the Kavanah. So I'm reading the Rebbe saying, Niflois, L'gab and Niflois, perhaps, again, it's all Islam B'derech Chevshet, maybe that's what the Rebbe means. Niflois of Samach Vov is the Gilui Sheyeshnu B'Mitzias, the Helam Sheyeshnu B'Mitzias. Meaning, something you can access through Yegiyah, through Aveda B'Kayach Atzmei. And Ayin Beis reaches the Pella of all Ploim. Remember I mentioned that in Likuntas in Yonash Al Teres Achsidus in Tavshin Chavov, it says Kislev Fabrengen. Yeah. The Yutas Kislev Fabrengen, the Rebbe said, the Rebbe gave out a Maimer, Poda B'Sholem Ayin Hey. That was the only Maimer given out from the Hemshel that we did not have. And in the Kuntas in Yonash says, how does it begin? He says, a state in the Maimer, the Rebbe Chazed the Maimer then, in Chavov, and he said, what state in the Maimer, as Primis HaTeireh, on Teres HaChsidus, with Heinz Rosh Hashanah for Chsidus, is Mushrish in Atzmus Ein Sof, Pnimius Atik, Radla, which is the level of Niflois, L'gab Niflois. So the Rebbe's Aces weren't just a nice line, and it's just to tell us how great it is. Ayin Beis is ultimately the Gili Ha'atzmus. And when the Rebbe gave it out in Lamed Zayin, it can move on a Poshet. We may not never understand why that year, why not Lamed Ches, why not Lamed Vov. But there's no question that the Rebbe was giving us the final frontier of what the tools we need to bring Mashiach. It's a long time since Lamed Zayin. But in some ways it's not so long. Lamed Zayin was deep in the Rebbe's Nesius already. So I think that there's no question that this is a hemshel that Rebbe was Meisha Nefesh for. He said clearly, Sakona. Again, I'm not going to start interpreting, I don't know if Gimel Tammuz is connected to Chav Zayin Noder. There are people who feel that way, maybe not. It's all speculation. But one thing is for sure, it's the ultimate hemshech, the one that Rebbe called by the names I just said, and there's no question that it connects directly to our work. So I want to just conclude with what I said at the opening. I hope I did a little justice to give a little taste of it. Probably not, it's Ayin Beis, but I think it's something we have to put our heads together. Kamuvin, everyone's busy. Never forget the Iker Hashlichus, not even the Iker, I would say, is the Yesoid HaYesoidus, is Chassidus. That's all the Rebbe did. Taught us Chassidus. All the Rabbeim. Everything else is the tools. You build a building, you have a minyan, all these things are beautiful. And I'm not taking away from it all, at all. But that everyone can do. We are here to bring the Gilui HaKeser Pnimi. The Alter Rebbe's Moshel is what? The Evan, Yikara, and what? And the Keser HaMelech. For the Ben Chela, if one drop enters, one drop from what? From the source of all sources. So there's no shaila in my mind that if we all applied ourselves, even on a level like I said in the beginning, to find in Yanim Chassidus, doesn't have to be the whole Emshech Kemuvin, ideas. Translate it first of all for yourself in a way that's, like you said, B'riya Muchshis. Kol echad ve'echad lishtadel to translate it B'riya Muchshis. I refer also to Perek, another very interesting Perek about what a Moshel in Chassidus is. Perek Kuf Mem. If you're interested, check that out. And I also refer Perek Reish Ayin Vov and Reish Ayin Zayin. If you want a good run for your money, what Atzmus is, read Reish Ayin Vov and Reish Ayin Zayin, what a Rebbe is. I'm not going to give away what it says there. Check it out yourself. From this. Lepel means we have to make a commitment to learn Chassidus, not just learn Beshufi and learn Shema. Learn Taka for the Nefesh Abamis, Gishmak, and more importantly, to be able to show to people how this offers us mamash a blueprint that connects us with something higher than us. That's the end of the story. Keset, Memutza, connects us to something higher. Now, if that's not the role of a shliach, what is your role? Tevus l'shakya. You are Memutzayim. The Rebbe's arms and legs, wherever you are, to what? To bring a lakus to that corner, to bring the Rebbe there. So in some way, you're the keser in your particular area. And we have to bring it in a